bethau hudol sydd ar hyd lle. Mae angylion yn byw dros Clare Street. Allwn ni deiri i mei gweld un noson wrth gerdded am adref ar dopiau rhai o'r taig ar llaw, yn rhannu straeon cynheuaf a serch, yng nghanol mwg, sigarets a glaw mis Awst. Ei sgwyddau'n cyffwrdd wrth swatio gyda'i gilydd a llewyrch nefol yn codi oddi arnynt, tua'r awyr.
Devon. I'm Taz from Just Another Poet Wales, and if I may, I'd love to ask you some questions about your poetry and your process of writing poetry, if that's all right.
Fantastic, yeah.
Okay, so the first question is, as this year's Eisteddfod winner, a poet writing in Welsh, is the experience of living in the capital of Wales anyway an influence in terms of how you write?
I'd say yes. I mean, any writer or poet that lives in a space or place does get influenced by their surroundings. I think, there's a lot to be said about Cardiff as a Welsh language experience. As I would argue, it's probably the only place where you can have a urban Welsh language experience on the planet. I'm from the periphery of Swansea, to the north of Swansea, and I'd argue that city doesn't have the same sort of institutions as Cardiff that enable Welsh speakers to congregate. You've got workplaces, I guess, like this place or that, or this place around us. You've got pubs. You've got a place like Clwb Ifor Bach for youth culture. You've got, I guess, chapels for another sort of demographic than me. So the strength of those movements, institutions, whatever you want to call them, mean that the Welsh speaker can exist in Cardiff in a natural way, far more than, I think, the city of my upbringing, Swansea.
What does it mean to you to win the Eisteddfod crown?
It means a lot, it's an honour. As far as, I'd say this though, as far as the relationship with my work, my own personal relationship with my work, it doesn't change, but it does mean that you enter into a club, I guess, of people who have met the standard. I think that's probably the coolest thing about the crown and the chair in the Eisteddfod, is that if you don't reach the standard, you don't get it. I've been in the pavilion when the chair hasn't been given, and it's been heartbreaking. Not because I tried or competed, it's because it's an expression of our culture and our and it carrying on, I guess. Not to put too fine a point on it, but the Welsh language, our oldest expression of it is in poetry. So it is sort of central to certainly how I view my relationship with the language, being part of that, of an expression of that, is a privilege.
Tell me a little about the story of your own publishing house.
GwasgPelydr. Yes, GwasgPelydr came about from a mistake, really. I was shooting a lot on a film camera that had a dodgy back, basically, and it meant that there were a lot of light leaks on it. I'm sure you're familiar with light leaks from your photography work, but so for the viewer, I guess, just to explain, it's when light reaches the film from another place except for the lens, and it creates this sort of strange heavenly effect on the
effect.
Sorry?
Holger-like effect.
Yes, on the print, and I was going through the prints, and I saw one picture, and I had such a emotional reaction to it that I had to write something, and I found the process of doing that so enjoyable that I carried on doing it. I went looking for other prints with mishaps, and I went to create deliberate mistakes as well, using lens caps, shooting abstract colors, putting the film into salt water and stuff like that, just playing about. And slowly but surely a collection came from that, which was Golau. And I had this collection of images and poetry, and I had been thinking for a while about the pamphlet as a medium. I guess in the English language, poetry pamphlets are more prevalent, less so in the Welsh language, and it was something that I wanted to explore as a medium, I guess, and I wanted to put the art and the words together, make it look pretty, and make it something that people would want to spend time with. In a way, having that idea, it meant I don't think any Welsh publishing house in Wales would have been like, well, yeah, we'll do it for you, without jumping through some hoops or something. So I decided to do it myself, and that's where GwasgPelydr came from, wanting to put that pamphlet out there, and also there was some economic necessity to it as well, because I'm in a precarious situation at the time with work, and I needed to get money in order to go to the Eisteddfod. So I printed 100, I took them to the Eisteddfod and sold them, and that's how I managed to fund my Eisteddfod week. I enjoyed that process so much then that I did another one the year after called Mawr, which was a pamphlet that looked at my upbringing in Mawr, the Mawr area of Swansea, which is a rural Welsh-speaking area just to the north of Swansea, and particularly reacting to the closure of my primary school. We were talking earlier about institutions and how important they are for Welsh speakers as a minority language. Removing an institution like a primary school from a rural village like that, it is devastating for the Welsh language and its culture, because you're removing a reason for Welsh speakers to congregate. You're removing the thing that keeps it young in that village, the children and the families around those children. So it was a sort of nearly a pamphlet wrote in grief about that loss, and a need to express the beauty of Mawr, yes, the beauty of a place of my upbringing before it was lost.
Please tell me a little about the special relationship you feel with your village. I mean, of course, you've touched on it already, but where does this sort of come from, and how it sort of goes on to your poetry in general, if I may? I
guess I think of Mawr, and I think of Felindre and Craigenpark, the two villages that are a part of Mawr, as my society, my community. That's where I feel most at home amongst those people. It's strange because you know, the last 10 years I've been living there on and off, between here and there really, I hadn't really been to the school or engaged with the community of Felindre until the closure, and it was quite an emotional experience after you know, your turbulent 20s, I guess, of returning there and people knowing who I was and speaking me in a manner that I recognised, and in a way that I don't think anybody else speaks to each other in that particular way. I'm not sure what I'm trying to say there, but you know what I mean. It's that feeling of your people, and engaging with that community again was a sort of on the one hand a healing experience, but also obviously devastating because of the closure of the school and the realization that was coming to an end. The link between that school and its wider community was ending, and yeah, I mean, you know, it's a special place for me. I'm not sure if it means anything to anybody else, but for me, it's potent. And I'd say, you know, one thing I'd say about the place where I grew up, there's a mountain. It's not much of a mountain; it's more of a hill. We call it Mynydd Gelliwastad. It's a Gelliwastad mountain, and from that top you can see what I, at one point I guess, imagined to be the whole of South Wales, because you see Swansea, the urban, you see over to Carmarthen and the agricultural, you see Port Talbot, the industrial, you see Clydach, the post-industrial. But of course, you know, coming to Cardiff, I understand now there's more to Welshness than even that, and there's even more plurality to it. This place, for example, what used to be here before these buildings, and Bootown. So, you know, I think it did give me a template maybe of an understanding of Welshness that could grow.
So it's sort of two different communities, but you can see parallels between them.
Well, this community here, it's a very different community. Yeah, I wouldn't say, you know, I'd say parallels wise, you know, it was close knit, similar to here. But I couldn't start to speak about the community of Bootown with any sort of authority. You know, it's just something that I can see and I'm excited to find, really. Yeah.
AmserMynd, a series of travel essays that came out as a result of a Literature Wales award. What drove you to write these essays?
So that was the third project of GwasgPelydr, and I released those essays last year, and they came out of a period travelling with my girlfriend in Southeast Asia, and basically I had a sort of discomfort being there around how the tourist industry expressed itself. This was tied to race and language and, most importantly, money. The US dollar was something. Well, okay. Let me try and phrase this. We'll start with the language. Okay, so the English language was something that the locals had learned in order to gain access to the wealth of the West, which meant that your experience, unless you spoke the local language, was sanitized and packaged in a certain way, and meant that I'm not sure if you could really go underneath the skin of those countries. It was a sort of a shallow idea of a place. Because of the necessity to sell it to white people like me, basically, visiting. Overwhelmingly white people, anyway, you know. So that's how the race thing comes into it. I don't know. I just felt just a general discomfort about it all while I was out there, and I needed to express that in a way. And these essays came out of it. It also has, you know, essays about enjoying traveling and enjoying culture, you know, being in a different culture, etc. But I do think there is a sort of unsaid sort of reality about those sort of experiences that are not explored, maybe, when people share their Instagram posts or what have you, that I wanted to sort of try and figure out, and try and figure out my privilege as part of that, you know.
Okay. Please. GwasgPelydr is a fascinating project. Please tell me a little more about it.
So we've covered the first three projects. The most recent one is creiriau.cymru, which is a website that I describe as a cultural labyrinth, where you're greeted with a GIF by the artist Gwenu Llwyd at the moment, though that may change in the future. And if you click on that GIF, it takes you to a piece of text, and pieces of that text in turn are highlighted. And if you click on, you know, a highlighted word, it might take you to a piece of visual art, or it might take you to a soundscape, or it might take you to a poem, or a essay, or, you know, a short story, and in turn that will lead you to somewhere else. So it was a sort of a collaborative effort. We put out an open call for contributors, and sort of built it together. It is growing. We do invite contributors if you want to contribute to creiriau.cymru. The only reserve I put on it is that it has to be in the Welsh language mostly. If it's a piece of text, if it's a piece of visual art, it doesn't matter really. That's that. Another thing from GwasgPelydr is that we're going to release a pamphlet by Morgan Owen, who's another sort of poet from my generation, from Erfurt, and he's worked in collaboration with Catrin Menai, who's a photographer, and she's taken pictures to sort of react to Morgan's work. So really excited to share that with the world when it's ready.
it's absolutely fascinating. I mean, I've had a look through the website actually, and it's kind of visually very, very stimulating.
Wait, the Creator.Cymru
Yes.
website. Yes, yeah. I mean, that was part of what I wanted as well. That the text and the visual art was sort of in the same place, and they weren't maybe separated, and somewhere where all these different art forms and all these different talents could be celebrated together in an expression that made sense. So I'm glad you say that.
So, final question. Poetry-wise, do you take inspiration from any other languages or cultures?
Well, I am restricted to the languages that I speak, which is Welsh and English. I'd say in the English language in Wales, I'm definitely excited by the work of where I'm coming from, especially Hananisa, who I think is a phenomenal poet. And then, further afield, I don't know where to start. The English language is such a large sea of amazing literature, and I guess, I like sci-fi novels. I like Alistair Gray. I like surrealists like Borges and Calvino. I guess they're translated into English, so if that works. I like hip hop. I like one thing that's worth noting is during my A-level English literature, my teacher Suzanne Ellis, who's sadly passed away now, really sort of unlocked the idea of literature and poetry, especially as I guess puzzles, because we were doing Eliot, which was a lot of complex unnecessarily complex stuff there, but the way she sort of broke it down and made us look for the tools that poets use, and also presented it as a puzzle for you to sort of unlock as a reader, really sort of influenced me in the way that I write. I always think it's better just to keep some things back and let the reader fill out what you're trying to say with their imagination. So yeah, I guess if that answers your question, I'm not sure.
Yes. I haven't really posed this question, but if I may, I'd like to ask if you have any recommendations of Welsh poets who we should be following, getting to know.
Oh well, the Welsh poetry scene is vast. It depends really what you want. You have a generation. I consider me a part of them, probably. Iestyn Taine and Grieg Muse, who've both recently released 2 poetry collections, which are fantastic. You've got Morgan Owen, of course, who's releasing something with me. Further back, you've got somebody like Iwan Llwyd. I mean, I'm not sure if you could. There might be some translations of his work. He's passed away now, but I consider his collection for the Crown probably the pinnacle of Welsh language poetry in the latter half of the 20th century. Going further back yet, you've got somebody like T.H. Parry Williams, who was I don't think you could probably translate him, but he's an important figure. I guess David Ap Gwilym. It's all, I don't know, it's all a hodgepodge for me. It's all these references and people that it's a big thing within the Welsh language. The idea of Welsh language poetry is the idea of traddodiad, of the tradition, and when you write, you sort of write with all these past
Yes.
expressions in your mind, nearly. But you know, I think people also are writing without that sort of baggage in a way, which is a really healthy thing. Somebody like Leo Maddox, maybe, who's writing sort of really short, snappy Insta poetry, where she, you know, is really strongly feminist, and she's sort of she's released a pamphlet, Stuff Ma Hogia wedi dweud wrtha i, stuff that men have told me, where men have sort of sarhad her.
I was reading about this recently.
Yeah, you've heard about it. Yeah, it's well, men have tried to put her down, or what have you, and her ownership of those sort of narratives. It's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's you know, pick your poison really with the Welsh language. You know, it depends what you like.
It seems like a very rich tradition that we should be finding out a lot more about as a community.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's one of the things that I find well, you know, hopeful about poetry in the Welsh language is that it is quite ordinary to be writing poetry within the Welsh language. It's not seen as something that's unordinary, you know. And I think about Raymond Williams' quote, "Culture is ordinary" a lot, and I think maybe this was true further back in the 20th century. Maybe it's sort of that sort of element has diminished now, but there is some truth to that still, and you know, we're still going.
Yes.
We're still doing it.
And long may it continue.
Yes, precisely. Yeah.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure finding out about you, and I'm wishing you the very best in your upcoming project.
Diolch, Taz. Thank you.
Diolch.